Hello, everybody, and welcome along to today's webinar, which is Sick Pay Made Simple. My name is Calvin, and I will be your host and presenter for today's session. And I do have Duncan alongside me, who will be available to answer any questions that you might have throughout the session today. So firstly, we're going to take you through a quick introduction of SSP, so an overview of what it is. We're then going to dive into having a look at recording sickness. So how are we going to record that in Sage 50 Payroll? We're next going to have a look at adjusting your employees' pay. And then lastly, we've got a little bit of a checklist there that helps troubleshoot any common SSP issues. And we're going to have a little bit of an interactive quiz at the end as well. Now, the quiz is completely optional and all answers are anonymous, but all the questions are based on what we'll be covering today. Now, the session itself is scheduled for 45 minutes, and we do have quite a lot of you on today, but the content itself is only going to last roughly half an hour, which is why we've scheduled it a little bit longer, just to give some time for the further support and questions at the end of the session as well. Don't forget, though, if you do have any questions, you can ask them throughout the session. You don't need to wait till the end there. And of course, I do need to mention that it is busy and we do only have Duncan, so we will be working tirelessly throughout. I will be helping him out at the end there. So apologies if there is any delays to any questions being answered. We will try our absolute best to get through as many as possible. So thank you for your patience in advance on that one. So let's get started and have a look at an introduction to SSP. So firstly, what is it? Well, SSP, or statutory sick pay, is paid to employees when they're ill and able to work. You can, of course, pay them more if you have a company sick pay scheme, but the statutory sick pay is the minimum. And currently, this tax year, it is £109.40 per week for up to 28 weeks. There are a couple of qualifying conditions when it comes to statutory sick pay. The first is they must be employed by you, of course. The second is that they must be off sick for 4 or more days in a row. And when we go through recording, you'll see how that plays into everything as well. They must also earn at least £123 a week. And they must notify you of their sickness. So they must let you know that they are off sick. After 7 days of being off, they then must provide you proof of their illness via a doctor's note, but this is only after they've been off for 7 consecutive days as well. So those are some of the qualifying conditions, in fact, all of the qualifying conditions. But there are still a couple of general rules when it comes to statutory sick pay. The first one is you're only going to be paying statutory sick pay for qualifying days. And again, you will see what qualifying days are and how they come into recording sickness in the next section. You will pay SSP, for employees on their normal pay date. So if you're monthly, you don't have to pay it weekly. You would just pay it on their usual pay date each month. Same, of course, goes for weekly. It's just whenever they normally get paid, you will pay the SSP on that day. Now, the first 3 qualifying days of any sickness are classed as waiting days, and this is where no SSP is payable. As we saw before with the general rules, they must be off for 4 or more consecutive qualifying days in order to be eligible for SSP. So that's where the first 3 qualifying days are classed as waiting days. PIWs, or period of incapacity to work, so you can see there why we abbreviate that to PIW. It's a bit of a tongue twister, that one, or I find that anyway. But they are linked if the gap between them is 8 weeks or less. So 2 periods of sickness are linked if they are if the gap between them is 8 weeks or less. Now, a period of linked sickness must again be 4 days or longer to then qualify for SSP. So to give you an example, if you have an employee who was off for a couple of weeks, comes back to work for 3 weeks, but then has a recurring issue, so then has to be off sick again. They then need to be off sick again for at least 4 qualifying days again in order to be eligible for SSP for that second period. If they come back and then they go off again for only 3 days and then they come back to work, they're not eligible for those 3 days, even though it's classed as a linked period of sickness. So let's have a look at recording sickness. So there are 2 ways to record sickness in Sage 50 Payroll. We're going to be focusing on the latter there, which is the employee record, but you can also use the quick SSP option. There are links at the bottom of this section in the handout for both ways of doing it, and again, there is no right or wrong to it, it's just personal preference, but for the demonstration we're going to be looking at the employee record because it shows you all the symbols that are on there. Speaking of symbols, you will see these in the absence diary, and they are as follows. So you have an X, which is a waiting day. It is then capitalized for historical. So you'll see there we've got current, which is a lowercase x, and historical is an uppercase X. Historical meaning you've updated records, so they've already been paid and processed. Paid SSP days are classed as a P. So those are any days that the employee is due some statutory sick pay. So again, lowercase for current, uppercase for historical. Non-qualifying days are classed as a dash or an equal sign for historical. So there's no way of having an uppercase dash. So we've added a line to turn it into an equal sign. A capitalized A is a sickness that's less than 4 days in a row. So those where they are not eligible for any SSP. And a capitalized W is when SSP is withheld. And on the right hand side there, we mentioned qualifying days. In fact, we'll mention that quite a lot throughout the session today. So you'll see there, we can set our working day pattern. And this is how qualifying days are calculated. So the example on the screenshot there is your standard Monday to Friday working day pattern, because the pattern always starts on a Sunday. So N for non-qualifying, Q for qualifying days. If you have a shift rotation, you can add additional lines. So if you have a set working day pattern that may have different days of the week, which we'll have a look at into the demo in a bit more detail, you can add additional lines there. If you have casual workers in regards to this, now this is HMRC's guidance. If there are casual workers who can ultimately work any day, or they don't know what their shift is until a couple of weeks before or the week before, the guidance there is to have all 7 days classed as qualifying days. The reason for that is they could potentially work any of those days. Okay, so that's the guidance that's come in for those casual workers, and those who potentially could work any particular day is to have all 7 days as Qs or classed as qualifying days. Once you've entered the sickness, you will see the amount that is payable as well as the number of weeks can be found in Enter Payments in the SSP/Parental Leave tab. You can also edit or delete any current sickness in this particular section. And of course, it's there to check the SSP payable. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dive into Sage 50 Payroll, and we're going to go ahead and record some sickness in our program, and I'll show you how to go about doing that. So here we are in Sage 50 Payroll. So we have an employee, just so I can remember, I've called him sick employee, so that I know which one I'm using for the demonstration, of course. We're going to dive into the employee record to record some sickness. So we're going to right click, select open employee. We're then going to go across to the absence tab, which is just here. You can see this employee has actually had, if I hover over it, some paternity already, but we're now going to enter some sickness for this employee themselves. So we've already updated September, so we're currently doing October. So we are looking a little bit in advance in today's demo. And we're going to say that this employee has had these 2 weeks off. So we're going to highlight them by just clicking, holding left click, and then dragging along. And then we're going to click right click, select SSP, and then due to sickness. And we're going to click OK. Now, Here we have those symbols that we went through, or some of them. So we have our 3 X's for the waiting days. So they're not going to be paid any SSP for these 3 days. We now have P's for the remaining weeks. And you can see the dashes on the weekends as this employee works Monday to Friday. Now, one thing to say on this. So if this employee were to come back on Monday, so this Monday, the 16th, after those 2 weeks, still include these 2 days as sickness. Okay, that's obviously for linked periods and the purposes of calculating those. They won't be paid for those 2 days because you can see there are 2 dashes. To check a working day pattern for an employee, click on the SSP tab down here. We'll just save those changes. And you'll see we have how the 8-week average earnings is calculated in here as well. So this figure in the top right must be over £123. And if we click on the qualifying days tab, you'll see here we have our qualifying day pattern. So as I mentioned, this employee is currently on a Monday to Friday. However, if that employee has a specific shift, for example, they do Monday to Friday, then they do Tuesday, Saturday, Wednesday, Sunday, and then back to Monday, Friday. What you would do is just click underneath to add a new line. You can select the drop down with some presets here, or alternatively, you can simply type your own in. So let's say the next one was Tuesday to Saturday, as I mentioned. So Sunday, Monday are off. Then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday are all qualifying days. Then let's say the next period or the next rotation is, as I mentioned, Wednesday to Sunday. So we know that this shift pattern starts on a Sunday. So you would have a queue there. Then Monday, Tuesday are their days off. And then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. There you go. What that would mean is they would go through this particular pattern, and then once they got the end of the pattern here, it reverts back to the Monday to Friday and then just cycles through on a 3-weekly basis. And as I mentioned, if you do have casual workers who can work any sort of different days, it's just all queues. If I click OK, and click yes, you'll see our dates have changed slightly. So that P's moved on to the Saturday there because of the working day pattern. And the reason for this is based on the pattern start date. So when did this working day pattern start for this particular employee? And that could well be the first Sunday that they started, or nearest Sunday to when they first started with you. So again, it can be different for each employee. There is no right and wrong. It has to be a Sunday. But of course, it's based on your employee and what you've got set for your employees there. We'll just leave it at this for the sake of the demo, but you can see there that we have in fact now changed it. If you need to change the working day pattern, you can do. So if you want to go back to a Monday to Friday, we can simply delete those additional lines, and then we can change the pattern start date to when they go back to the Monday to Friday, and anything before this date will remain on the old pattern that you set previously. There we go. Just to highlight as well, the linked periods of sickness. As I mentioned earlier, you must have at least 4 consecutive qualifying days off again to qualify, 4 days, off again to qualify for statutory sick pay for the second period. So if we were to highlight, let's say this employee came back Monday, Tuesday, and then was off sick again, we would highlight these 3 days, click due to sickness, click OK. You'll see there we have 3 A's. And this just means that this employee is not going to get any statutory sick pay. So if they returned here and you entered it this way, they're not going to get any SSP for their linked period. However, if we enter that weekend, you'll see that it's now 5 consecutive days. We are going to be paying SSP for that employee. So if they return on the Monday, That's why we need to make sure we're highlighting all of the days up to the day that they return to ensure that it's recorded correctly. If you need to delete any, because we're going to delete the second now, highlight the days that you've selected or entered, right click, select none, and you'll see the days have disappeared. So click save, close. Let's jump into enter payments for this employee, and we'll go to SSP/parental leave. You can see we have our period that we've entered here, which is 1.4 weeks, because remember, we've got the 3 waiting days at the start, so that's why it's not 2 full weeks. And we have an amount of £153.16. If we click on the summary tab, you will see it here on this line as well. So that's how to record SSP. So as you can see, it's fairly straightforward. As long as you've got your working day pattern set up with that start date for the working day pattern, it's right clicking, selecting SSP for the days that they are off sick all the way up until the day that they return. If we return now to our presentation, because we're going to move on to the next section, which is all about adjusting your employees' payments. So this is an option for those who potentially are have company sick pay schemes. For example, we have the Make It Basic option. Now what this does, and we'll show you a demo of it as well, is it will adjust any normal payments or their salary or wages payments to account for statutory sick pay. So for example, you have a sick pay scheme where the first 6 weeks they're off, they're entitled to full pay. My employee was only off for 2 weeks, so we know that they should still, and they're monthly paid, they should still receive their full pay for that month. So we can use the Make It Basic to ensure that we're still recording statutory sick pay, because we do need to record that for HMRC purposes, and of course any additional sickness going forward purposes. So we can make sure that their salary accounts for the statutory sick pay. So what we'll do now, let's quickly jump into the program again. I'll show you the Make It Basic in action. So we head back over to the summary tab. You can see here we have our pre-tax payments of £2,000, which is what they regularly get on a monthly basis. This employee is salaried. So that is what they were paid last month. But we've now got statutory sick pay. So because I haven't made any adjustments yet, this employee is currently getting paid their regular amount plus statutory sick pay. So they're actually getting paid more for being off sick, which of course isn't right. So what we need to do is click this button here, which is Make It Basic. We're going to click yes to this message. And you'll see now, and I'll show you what it's done in the payments tab in a minute. You'll see now that the pre-tax payments has reduced to incorporate the statutory sick payment, which then gives us a total taxable gross back to the full £2,000, which is what they would normally get. Now I'll show you how it's done that by clicking on the payments tab here. It's adjusted the hours. So the rate has not changed, it's simply adjusted the hours. Now, if you all can just remember this figure, £1,846.84, I'm going to show you a mistake that is quite often occurred with Make It Basic. So it's done that now, but I needed to go back and do a couple of things which ended up being more statutory sick pay. I'm not going to do that for time's sake, but let's just pretend, okay? The statutory sick pay now went up or down. So I've come back into it, the summary tab, and I've clicked Make It Basic again and clicked yes. You'll notice our pre-tax payments have gone down, but if you look at the total, it's now taken what we had previously in this top row as the total amount of the normal payments, if that makes sense. So now it thinks that the normal payment is £1,846.84. What you need to do, if you need to adjust the sick pay and then go back and Make It Basic again, is always ensure you go back in here, change that back to the hours that it should be. So in our case, it was 1. Go back to the summary tab, and then you can press make a basic once more. Okay, so if you do need to make an adjustment to statutory sick pay, this goes for any statutory payments as well, including your parental payments. Just make sure that you're resetting the hours back to what they were before you go ahead and click make a basic again. That's if you've made an adjustment. Hopefully you don't need to do that, and everything's right first time, of course. So that's the make a basic option, and that's a great tool for if you pay a company sick pay. For those who don't, the alternative option is you will need to adjust the payments manually, so you can jump into enter payments, calculate what you need based on the pro rata basis. So if we don't have a statutory company sick pay scheme, so that employee should only be getting full pay for 2 weeks of the month and 2 weeks at sick pay. I'll need to work out based on their salary how much pay they are due for those 2 weeks, enter that in the payment screen, and then allow the other 2 weeks to be the sick pay only. Okay, so that is a manual process. So you would manually work out what they are due for the days that they did work and just simply enter that in enter payments. Okay, so troubleshooting for statutory sick pay. We've got a little bit of a checklist here for things to go through. So what things to check? So we have firstly our process date. So statutory payments, so sick pay and parental payments, are all calculated up to and including your process date. So double check what your process date is set as to make sure it's correct, to then know what should be calculated for that. Next, diary entries. You can pop into the absence diary as we showed you to check what symbols appear. Is there the right amount of Ps? Are they on the right working day pattern? Are the waiting days there? Have they been off for 4 more consecutive days, for example? That will all have an impact on what symbols appear. Just mentioned it there, but qualifying days is the correct working day pattern assigned. So you can usually get a clue from checking the diary entries, but it's also worth checking that's correct as well. Average earnings. So again, SSP button in the absence tab. Check to see if the employee is earning over £123 a week. Make sure that they are. And the other one is check to see if there's any previous periods of incapacity to work or PIW. Are those details correct? And have they already had their 28 weeks? So remember, if they're linked, that 28 weeks counts on. So our example, we had 2 weeks, means they've got 26 left. If they're off within 8 weeks of that first period, they still only have 26 left. So double check to make sure that they're not linked, which means their allocation or their entitlement may have run out. Okay, so as I promised, we're going to do a quick quiz. We've got 4 questions. We've covered everything in the quiz in the today's session. The quiz is going to be worked in poll format, so what you'll see on screen, and you can still ask questions whilst we do this, of course. You'll see a couple of choices with the question on. Select what you think is the right answer and hit submit. As I mentioned, it is completely anonymous and optional, although I would like to have as much engagement as possible, of course, but you don't have to if you don't want to. And what we'll do is we'll share the results based on a percentage, and then we'll reveal the right answers. Okay, so we'll also have the answers on for about a minute, so it's going to be a minute per question. All right, so let's bring up the first quiz, and of course, it is all about the weekly rate of SSP. So what is the current weekly rate of SSP in this tax year? So what is the weekly rate of SSP in the current tax year? Is it £99.35? Is it £109.40? Or is it £172.48? Again, you should see those 3 options. Select what you think's right and hit the submit button. As I mentioned, we'll leave this on for a minute, which means we've got roughly 20 seconds left on this particular question. Okay, so that is the minute up for this question. So we're going to close that one down. Let us share the results. So we have an overwhelming majority of 96% of you going with £109.40. And the majority of you are correct. So it is £109.40 this particular tax year. Those who selected 99.35, you were thinking last tax year. So that's what it was, last tax year. Okay, so let's hide that one and we'll move on to question number 2. We'll launch this one. It's about the consecutive days. So how many consecutive days does an employee need to be off for during a linked period of sickness to resume SSP payments? So it's about linked periods of sickness and consecutive days off. So is it 3? Is it 1? Is it 4? Again, we'll leave that on for about a minute for all the answers. Okay, so we have had our minute come to a close, so let's close this one down. And once again, we'll share the answers. So again, we've got a big majority of 91% going with 4 days, 7% saying 3. The correct answer is the 4 days. So they must be off for 4 days or more. So if you remember in the demo, we highlighted 3 days for our period, linked period, and it came up with 3 A's. So what this means is they're not entitled because they need to be off for 4 or more days. Okay, question number 3. Again, we'll launch this now. What is the minimum average weekly pay to qualify for SSP? So part of that troubleshooting checklist as well. So what's the minimum average weekly pay that an employee must earn to qualify for statutory sick pay? Again, 1 minute on for this one. So it means we've got about 30 seconds left now. Okay, so that is the minute up. So let's close this one down once more. Share the results again. Another big majority, perhaps thinking I might make these questions a little bit more difficult next time, or you're just really good listeners. £123 is correct. So it's £123 a week. That is, of course, for this current tax year, and does sometimes change each tax year. So always is worth checking. Quick note on that, for any legislative questions that you might have when it comes to anything, click company in the bottom left of your payroll program, then click legislation, and you can find all the details in there. I was going to tell you that before, but then I thought that might make the quiz even easier, so kept it till after. Okay, final question. We're going to launch this one once more. What is the maximum number of weeks between 2 PIWs for the 2 periods to be classed as linked? So how many weeks in between 2 periods of sickness for them to be classed as linked? Is it 38, 56, 8, or 12? Again, similar to before, 1 minute for each for this question, and we'll reveal said answers. Okay, so that is the minute up for the final question. So let's close that one down now and also share the results. Another big majority, definitely going to have to make these more difficult. So 8 is correct. So 94% of you got that absolutely spot on. So 8 is correct. So it's 8 weeks between any two periods of sickness for them to be classed as linked. If it's 9 weeks, they're two separate periods. So that was the quiz. As I mentioned, just a little bit of engagement to refresh what we've gone through. So let's have a look at some further support you have available. So we have come to that point. So first and foremost, you have our help center. So if you want to visit sage.co.uk/help, you can access our support guides. There's webinars to be found in the top right hand corner, if you can see that there. So we do run them weekly. Videos, get in touch options as well if you do need to speak to someone, and of course you can search through our knowledge base. So if we do end the session and you forgot to ask a question, or one comes to you a bit later on, as is often the case with myself, you can just search for that question in the search bar via our help center. What I would also like to point out when it comes to the help center as well, and this is a great one for SSP specifically as well, is if you're in the program, press F1 on your keyboard and you'll have a version of the help center pop up directly in product as well. Now, if you're currently recording some sickness, either through quick SSP or you're in the absence diary, when you press F1 at that point, the guides will have changed that you see pop up all about SSP, either quick SSP or employee absence diaries. So again, it does recognize where you are in the program and give you the relevant guides to that specific area. So again, best way I can just tell you for this one, or best advice I can give you, sorry, is if you're in your Sage 50 payroll program, press F1 or click any of the help icons and have a look at it for yourself. Nothing changes, doesn't affect any processing that you've done. You just have a new window with all the help that you potentially need, and you can access a web chat through there as well. So that's our help center. And last but certainly not least, Sage University, which is sageu.com, which is free to register for as a Sage customer, where you can access e-learning courses, Sage certification as well, and some bite-sized learning. So this can all be done in your own time and at your own pace. So again, I do know time is of the essence when it comes to running a payroll, but if you do want to expand your Sage payroll learning a little bit further, do head on over to Sage University and have a look at that as well. I do highly recommend it, and some of the courses are brilliant as well, really engaging and really valuable as well. Okay, so that is the end of the session. We are going to stick around, as promised, for the remaining 10 minutes or so to answer any remaining questions you guys do have. I will be back fairly shortly at the 1:45 mark to wrap things up, or a little bit earlier if we get all the questions answered, of course, as well. We don't want you to be sitting there in silence, but we'll be back shortly once that is. If you are leaving us at this point as well, it's been an absolute pleasure to see so many of you attend today's session. Hopefully you've enjoyed it and learned a little bit as well, and it's made processing statutory sick pay a little less daunting, a little bit easier for you, of course, as well. When you do leave the session, you will be directed to a short feedback survey, and apologies for sounding a bit like a broken record on this one, because I'm sure you get told or asked this every single time you speak to any customer services or support from any different company, but it does mean the world to both myself and Duncan if you do just spend a short amount of time filling hours in, as it helps us to develop the webinars, add things in such as the quiz based on the feedback that you guys give us. So it gives us plenty of ideas and also helps us make some changes to make sure they are as valuable and of course as engaging and enjoyable as possible. So I do really appreciate you taking that small amount of time just to fill that in. I'm going to jump on mute now, help Duncan out with some of the questions, and as I mentioned, I'll be back later to say our final goodbyes. Thank you. Okay, so we have come to the end of the session now, and it does look like we managed to get all of the questions answered. So thank you very much for both your patience and, of course, your time for today. I certainly hope you have enjoyed it, and thanks to those who stuck around to the very end. Of course, don't forget, when we do end the session, you will be directed to that feedback survey, and of course it does, as I mentioned earlier, mean quite a lot to both myself and Duncan. That's all from us. All that's left for me to say is I hope you're all looking after yourselves out there, and of course still staying safe, and hopefully we will see you on some future webinars. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.